Okay. Hi, my name is Salim, and I'm the co-founder and CTO of DevPanel. We've been doing static sites for a bunch of customers, so we're here talking about it. And I'm going to hand this off to Elijah.
Thanks. Yeah, my name is Elijah Lynn, and I am a DevOps engineer on the CMS for the VA.gov project. It's open source repository. And we did a talk here last year on how VA.gov uses the static site and kind of like the road ahead and stuff like that. So I'm going to give an update on where that's headed a little bit later, and also maybe chime in here and there with some discussion about static sites and what I've learned and my opinions and things like that.
Yeah, and this is more an open discussion. Robbie was going to join us as well. He sends his regrets. He wasn't able to join us today. So it's just me and Elijah doing this. So um, anyways, for those of you who know Robbie, he says hi. So okay, so the motivation for this talk was originally for this talk was the 550,000 Drupal 7 sites that are out there. And what to do with them. We've got a bunch of clients that we're working with, and these clients have, some of them have over 1,000 Drupal 7 sites. They were created by these departments and these groups in their organization back when they had budgets. Now they don't have budgets to upgrade them, and they don't have budgets to maintain them. But the sites need to be there because they've got incoming links on them. So what do you do with these sites, right? So that was the question. That was the motivation for this talk. And one of the solutions that we had come up with was, you can create static sites from those and just leave them as static sites, and that takes a lot of overhead out of maintaining those sites. So that was the original motivation for this talk. So just to kind of set the stage. What's the difference between static sites and dynamic sites? So just to give you a background. Um, on the dynamic site, it's basically the number of moving parts. On the dynamic sites, you've got the database, you've got the PHP engine running, that's generating the pages. That's every time there's a request made, you've got PHP running that querying the database inside your server. And we've got things like Varnish, Drupal caching, Memcache, all of these things that turn around to make the 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 site generation and the page generation faster. And then we're serving out HTML pages. Um, on the static site, we're pre-rendering these pages, the HTML, and we can stick them on the server, and we just hand out the pages. So it makes it much faster, and there's all the moving parts go away. And to make it even to go even further, you can take the server away, and you can take those HTML pages, you can put it on S3 or an object storage. Uh, some kind of object storage, and put a CDN in front of it. And now you've got a CDN as a content delivery network, and now you've got pages being served without even a server being involved. So you've got a serverless solution. Well, somebody's got a server, but you're not managing that server. So from your perspective, it's a serverless solution, and it's being served, and it's really, really fast. So the number of moving parts go away, essentially go away. So the benefits of static sites, uh, from a performance perspective, on dynamic sites, we have to work to make it performant. We have to tweak things. We have to actually work to make it faster. On the static site, out of the box, they work pretty fast. It's not that you don't have to still optimize them. You still have to take care of optimizing images and other things, but out of the box, they work pretty fast. The load times, the time to first byte and so on, are pretty good. And given that people want to stick around, they only stick around 5 seconds or less for load times. The static sites do pretty good. Now, Um, this is you can argue that this is if you've got a cache running on a Drupal site with a warm cache, this is Drupal sites will go fast as well. Uh, so yeah, you can optimize your dynamic site, and it'll go head to head with static site as well. So that's that's here nor there. So from a security perspective, static sites, um, you're removing 99% of the attack, more than 99% of the attack surface here. So because uh, we've all been there, last minute updates and patches to PHP, MySQL, to Drupal, not to mention the OS updates and things like that. Um, zero day attacks and things like that. So when you have a static site, most of these things go away. Um, so that's a big benefit, and especially if you're serving the static site out of a CDN, you get a lot of additional benefits like the WAF, the Web Application Firewall, which prevents you from DDoS attacks. You get the SSL, TLS, HTTPS. Of course, those things kind of come by default with anything. You get access control. You also get compliance. So with AWS, um, CDN, their CloudFront, you get the PCI, HIPAA, ISO, SOC, FedRAMP, and all these things are built into their CDN. So, and the hosting costs go down dramatically. You're paying for data transfer. You're not paying for page views, and the data transfer rates fees are just ridiculously small. So, and you can get started with the free tier as well. And the nice thing is, the greater your traffic, the less you're paying per gigabyte. The total cost of ownership goes down as well. You've got on the engineering side, you've got all these moving parts that you have to maintain. The maintenance, the support, performance optimization, security updates, upgrades, and so on. You're doing that on the Drupal side. Um, on the static site, you don't have those issues going on. But at the same time, there is a caveat here, because if you are managing Drupal, for example, behind the firewall, and you're doing your dev test stage behind the firewall, and then you're pushing it out to a static site, then you are still managing both sides of the equation. So that's something to consider. If you're generating a static site from Drupal, you are still managing Drupal, and you're still managing the static site. So okay, so benefits of dynamic site. I'm going to turn this over to Elijah, and he can talk about this more and bring in the context of from VA.gov as well. So
Thanks. Yeah, benefits of dynamic sites. You get all the normal features of Drupal. You don't have to rebuild and refigure all that stuff out. Layout tooling, layout builder, things like that. You get all the views filters and all that stuff you can use. You get routing, redirect management, and permissions, authorization, things like that. But really, like, in addition to all that stuff, you get instant publishing. Boom. Now, traditionally, like, CDNs would still have like older kind of time to live or cache expiry times and things like that, max age, cache max age headers and things like that. But modern integrations with CDNs, you can use Drupal now and instantly purge, like fast purge. Akamai has integration, Fastly has integration. So you can have, like, in under a couple seconds, the whole global cache invalidated. And so that's what you get from dynamic sites. Static sites, you have to figure things out around that. Now, you can basically have real-time content, but if you're building a whole build all the time, that can take time. So you end up with like incremental builds and things like that. I guess I have another slide for that. But also, you have real-time API access with a dynamic site. You don't have to figure out how to, like, take certain blobs of data and throw them into JSON files that your front end can then fetch and process. Because you can kind of do that, and it's just you have to find workarounds for that. So also search, which is normally offloaded to something else anyways, but forms, generally like I think Quant has a form service. Quant CDN will cover that. So it's a static site integration with Drupal. Netlify, they have a form service you can use for their static sites, things like that. And obviously, any kind of real-time stuff, you don't really get that. But real-time Drupal, real-time dynamic sites do provides all that stuff. So move on to the next slide. Yeah, big picture on static sites is the actual static site has the security footprint is very tiny. You're kind of outsourcing that to a web service like S3, and believe it or not, S3 is a web server itself. And there's just the uptime is great. There's no DDoS really. I mean, you might end up with a big bill if you have a large DDoS attack on your static site. But it's nice. There are a lot of nice things to static sites. They just serve out the content, and it's there. You don't have to worry about your server crashing or anything like that. Other than your editors, high editor load, but you don't have like this anonymous kind of public intranet facing traffic to affect things. We're starting to hear a little bit of feedback. Is that from me? Is anybody else hearing that?
And hey, just to interject here on the one thing, I wanna encourage people, if they have any questions, just to put in the questions. We're gonna answer those right away. We're not gonna wait till the end necessarily. I mean, you can ask them at the end too, but if you have questions, just ask them right away. On the DDoS attack, Elijah, we had an incident with one of our clients where they did get a DDoS attack, and AWS did credit us for it. So they're pretty lenient on that, and their CDN service actually they advertise that they'll protect you against DDoS. So that's something I don't know if other vendors do it. I'm just talking about our experience with AWS. So.
Do you mean Cloudflare or CloudFront? I'm sorry,
yeah.
Amazon CloudFront.
Yeah, the CloudFront.
Yeah. I guess if you're using the CDN, then there's a thing there. Yeah. So I think the big picture here is that with Drupal, your first request is a cold cache hit. It's got to get generated. So Drupal has to generate it. Then it usually serves it to Varnish and or a CDN, and then it goes hop, and then it finally gets to the user. So the first time to first byte after a cache clear. So this is every time you deploy a Drupal site, you do a cache clear, cache rebuild. So that time to first byte, you get a cold cache hit, and anytime that's invalidated, you got to go back and get that cache repopulated. So that's static site. It's there. It's always warm. It's just a warm, nice little fuzzy warm cache. So that's great. Your time to first byte is like a more consistent user experience with static. And then you don't have all the load from generating that cache, but you do have your load when you build the site actually, or flush it out to the server the first time. It's good. It says there's a bullet on here, good for SEO, because all things considered equal, search engines will prioritize in search results faster sites. If there's two sites that are kind of equal, the faster site will get better SEO. No server-side caching needed. Yeah, you don't need to do that. You'd still want to have memcache likely on your Drupal side. You don't need it. It's the editor experience is a little slower. Memcache will speed up that editor experience, but you wouldn't need it for the public-facing anonymous traffic. I think that second bullet there scales massively CDN and edge caching. That's true. Dynamic sites also do that fairly well. So, yeah. There's the last bullet there, no last minute PHP. There's this new, we have a slide in a little bit. There's a new executive order out. Some of you in the Gov space might know about it. And it's basically around zero trust architecture. So it's kind of like keeping security posture lax because you're behind a firewall is kind of like not really recommended. And we all, a lot of us do that, but that way if one device is compromised and you're depending on your firewall protecting you, then you have a whole bunch of applications behind your firewall that are vulnerable because you're like, oh, we don't need to install security updates that much. So that's a little bit controversial, but as far as the static site itself, yes, you don't need to update security stuff. You do have a back-end dynamic database Drupal site that does need care and tending to. So there's like trade-offs that get shifted around with static, and it's not always easy to see that right away.
Yeah. Kelly asked a good question, saying, can you publish sections of the site? We'll get to that, Kelly, in a little bit. But the answer is yes, and there are times where you can't. So we'll get to that in a second. Okay, so I'm going to go to the next slide, and I just want to be conscious of the time. So we're at.
I didn't see the question, so I'm not sure where that's.
Yeah, it's in chat.
Yeah, I'm not seeing anything in the session chat actually. So
yeah,
I guess
I'll keep an eye on it. So it's okay.
Yeah, I think I'm in the wrong thing somehow.
I'll jump in.
Yeah, based on what Kelly said, that yeah, you can come up with like a strategy to publish certain sections and then validate just those sections and things like that, and you can do incremental static site publishing, things like that. The big thing is you always have a potential global cache invalidation issue where you update like a menu or something like that, and that's on the whole site, and so you have to really like work on all that stuff for fast publishing times and things like that. So. Anyways, easy to archive. Yeah, the version control is kind of nice. There's one tool I saw recently, like you basically have like snapshots of like this site. This was the site at this given time. It's real easy to roll that back. You don't have to like go and like restore a database or something like that, and things like that. So your cache essentially is the static files. And that's what you keep updated versus cache in Varnish and or a CDN.
Yeah, I see the question.
Yeah, that's all I got on that one.
Yeah, there's a question about recommendations on search, and then I just wanted to say, Alex, that we will we touch on that in the we'll give you the links on the different types of search engines you can integrate in the appendix as well. So we'll talk about it a little later on. So, and then the other thing for versioning is, yeah, it's great because you're versioning your files on S3, and S3 is high durability, and you don't have to worry about those files going bad. So.
Elijah, I can see your messages, so I'm not sure if it's your browser or.
Yeah, it's probably my browser, Brave Shield.
Okay.
I don't want to turn it off right now. I'll have to refresh and leave and come back and all that stuff. So I'll just trust y'all.
Okay, so the cons on static site is, you want to cover that in context of your VA.gov? Yeah.
You really, I mean, you can do a little bit of redirect stuff with S3. They have like redirect support for serving actual redirects. You can also use like some meta tag to do redirects, things like that. But you don't have, it's just challenging because it doesn't really work out of the box like it does with Drupal. Like if you edit a new node, right, you have a URL for a new node, then it just automatically works and keeps like you can change the redirect like 20 times and it'll always just do one single redirect to the most current node. It doesn't go to one to the next, to the next, to the next, and stuff like that. So that's a really tough thing. You also don't get like a route controller. So you have a slash index HTML path. Basically, it's like just every single slash path is its own thing. So it's challenging. You kind of, it's just worth knowing that out of the box that you're going to lose out on some of that feature. Second one, real-time Drupal API request won't work. Yeah, pretty much that's it. So there's if you need that, it's probably not a good idea. You can do workarounds to like push certain types of data and like real time into JSON blobs, and then you'd have the front end API request that from an S3 bucket. Like maybe it's like some people will do like a menu, and the menu will go push out to there. So they'll decouple the structure of their site in order to have a static site work. So you're like menu and footer and like these global objects would all be like consumed, but then they're client side rendered in a sense, and you have a little bit of page, I call it page jank, where it's like trying to load stuff. So you kind of want to, like in an ideal world, you'd like server side render that, so you're delivering one continuous chunk of HTML at one time. So some people put like a layer in there to do like munge the menu and the footer with the content, the static site content, and then serve that out. I don't know. It gets complicated. It's like you're doing all this stuff to save this other stuff, but then you have all these other pitfalls. External contact forms. Yeah, you have to have a way to all forms to get submitted into their thing, into wherever you're going to manage that. You know, it doesn't come back into Drupal, and some people don't want to use that for Drupal anyways. They want to use just like content. So that's fine for some people. Just know that. Yeah, search. A lot of people use external search anyways. That can be indexed, but then you have to like ship your static content and then trigger that external search to search that content, and it's just a little more complicated. Dynamic static conversions take a long time. Yeah, that's a challenge. There is like Tome. Tome is a module by Samuel Mortensen that will actually crawl your kind of like you actually literally render functionizes your whole site with your current theme. So you don't have to do a conversion in that particular model, but if you're going to do like a decoupled static system, then you kind of have to flesh all that out and kind of rebuild it basically, either using GraphQL or something like that in your build system, or JSON API or something like that. So, all right.
Yeah, so a couple of things on the redirect. If you're using S3, and I don't know about other systems, but on AWS S3, with S3 now, AWS has this thing called Lambda on the edge, which allows you to write a lot of redirect rules, and it's pretty cool. It doesn't do the hops like Elijah was talking about, but you can check that out if you're interested in that. And then the Lunar search and some of the other search engines. Some other search will actually look through your HTML, but there are other things that you can install into Drupal, and it'll create your search index. It'll actually create your search index in Drupal that you then export out into your HTML, and then your search will work through that. So those are different ways of doing it.
Yeah, global cache invalidation. That's really a big one. There's these certain cases where no matter what you do with the static site, well, every now and then you're gonna have to do a full site rebuild. Quant CDN calls it a seed job, things like that. It's not horrible, but when you get higher node counts, it starts getting pretty painful. Editors then want to get their content out, but you're looking at 10 minutes, 20 minutes to do like build all 50,000 nodes, because every single one of those static HTML generated piece of content has a shared object that needs to be updated. So then you end up like trying to architect your site again, like to have these like components, and you're basically doing like edge side includes at that point, but you're doing it at like a server side rendering stage. And I know some of that's kind of confusing. I'm not going to go explain all those terms right now, but the point is like every now and then you got to do one, and you need to know how to trigger that. How do you build logic to do that? We'll talk about this in a second, but the Quant CDN tool, it's not the greatest name. Sorry, Stuart, who built that, but I had a demo of that the other day, and that actually works off full like cache tags on Drupal. So it knows, it kind of know that stuff, but it's still like you still have to do it, and it takes a while, and it creates an inconsistent editor experience. It's kind of like if you have a high node count, and you might not be a great solution. I don't know. It depends on your budget and all that stuff too. No real-time content updates. Yeah, there is with incremental builds. You can get near real time now. You can actually just with like Quant and the cache tag and validation, you can get out pretty quick. But it's not, if you're doing your own type of system, you have to figure all that out. You have to do basically a Drupal cache tag and validation integration with your static. And you can do sections of your site. You can do just per content, things like that. So maybe like a section of your site has a shared menu, and you update that menu. Well, that whole section and all like maybe 500 pages of that section need to get pushed out, and you just have to end up maintaining all this logic and things like that. And it's just a little bit messy sometimes. You can take that third one.
Yeah, there's pretty much, when you're building out static sites from Drupal, there's no easy way to there's no enterprise grade tool chain that allows you to preview your site and then create dev test stage environments and then push it out to a live static site. So you have to build your own tool chain. That's something that we've been working with some other clients to help them build out, but that's something that we've seen missing in the market. So, but and then the manual CDN setup and configuration, you'll have to. That's something that you have to do, and some tools are out there that allow you to do that now. So, anyways, so the con is, for static sites, it's not right for all sites. That's something you have to figure out. So, okay. So Elijah, you want to give an update on where you
Sure.
guys are with VA.gov?
Yeah, so we did this talk a little bit ago, and I joined the VA.gov project in October of it's been a while, 2018. And it was like, so there's some news around that time called vets.gov, and vets.gov eventually became VA.gov. And that system was like a really good POC, and it used the Markdown repo actually on GitHub. That was like the content store. Editors would make a pull request, and they'd have that, and then the Jenkins build would kick off that and put everything in an S3 bucket. That's mostly still the same, but in 2019, we moved the content repo to a Drupal content API, and it was accessed with GraphQL in this Metalsmith kind of build system to Jenkins. So it would reach out and get the content from Drupal. And that worked for a while, and then the GraphQL query, it was just like a monster GraphQL query made up of GraphQL fragments over time, got slower and slower. And we were gonna move, there's a talk at the bottom here, we're like, we're gonna use Tome, and Tome was able to like incrementally publish. And this is kind of like a government thing where like, well, our team does this and the other team does that, and we're just responsible for this. So we made the content available like super fast, and Tome is like it exports a bunch of JSON, and it was like a second to get all the content, and it would incrementally update it. But every time we needed a deployment, we had to like do basically a full site export, and it was parallelized with multiple CPU, and all that stuff, and it made it pretty fast. But anyways, so the update here out of that talk is we did not end up going that route. It proved to be too complicated of an API to work with, just a bunch of JSON. Like every single entity was a JSON file, including the nested entity references. They're all separate entities, and you had to follow each one. And reference all that down. And it was like great, a second to get all the content, but the build was still taking a long time, and it wasn't a clear path for that team to do like incremental. I'm getting a little bit of feedback. Can you mute Salim? I think it might be is it coming through your speakers or is it my speakers? You fixed it? Okay. So anyway, I want to highlight that whole system worked. Sometimes you got to do things and get it working. And the whole static site idea for VA.gov was pretty much necessary. It's really hard to get stuff approved in government, especially like exposing a new application to the internet and like security, like the whole security thing, the DDoS thing, and all that stuff. And we kind of ultimately are now arriving in a new direction, and we're arriving at a direction where we're going to go back to a dynamic, non-static, also decoupled though. Like it's not going to be Drupal theme, but we're not exactly clear on how the front end is going to work yet because we have existing static. Like there's no like single route controller for VA.gov, so it can't just like intercept the route. Well, maybe we could. I don't know. Anyways, it's we're kind of working through that, but we have like what 20,000 nodes and like I don't know, like maybe 10 or 20,000 nodes. Tim is on here; he might know. But we have like as far as like nested entities and stuff like that, like at least 30,000, I think, entities, and that have to get built out and all that stuff. Anyway, the builds are still taking like 15 minutes, I think, something like that, for the static site. So we're finally moving in a path, and it really required a lot of like talking to people, to other teams to see, hey, can we do this? Can we do that? And we think we figured out a way to do it through API.va.gov, which is like expose Drupal as an API through there, but an abstracted API that's not very Drupal-y, that's a little bit more like sanitized almost. So that's kind of the direction we're heading. So the big takeaway from this is like we are moving away from a static site at VA.gov. Now we did look at a tool called QuantCDN, and if we were, that was like, wow, that's pretty amazing because it had almost all the stuff that we wanted, except it doesn't do real-time requests, and you still have this issue about like a global cache change and seed jobs and stuff like that, which we have like 50 active editors at a time right now and like 700 users total in the system, and that's going to keep growing to like 1,000 or 2,000. And then we're going to have a lot of people doing stuff, and we don't want like we just need a real-time CMS. I think for this use case, it's kind of like we need to go that route, and it's okay to have a team monitoring for DDoS and things like that and stuff like that. So
Elijah, there's a bunch of questions coming in, so I'm just going to throw them at you. So one of the questions is this a Tome site, tome.fyi? Tome.fyi is the correct URL for Tome, but right now, Elijah, I think you guys are running decoupled. You're not running Tome, right?
yeah, we're not using Tome. We were in that talk. We were building out a Tome version, a Tome that's called Tome Sync. So that a Tome Sync just exports JSON. It doesn't actually do all the render for your current theme. So there's two different kind of ways to use Tome.
Yeah, and there's another question from Megan saying, I'm at VA.gov and manage the intranet site VA.gov for the entire public domain, or is this a medical center sites? Just a medical center?
Yeah, I think the question there is the work y'all are doing, Elijah, for the entire VA.gov public sites, or is it just the medical center sites?
Yeah, the medical facilities. So it's eventually getting all the facilities, like the regional facilities and stuff like that, like Pittsburgh and Alaska, and all those kind of stuff. Like they all kind of are or were subdomains. Like Pittsburgh.va.gov was like the first one we moved over. Now it's va.gov/Pittsburgh or Pittsburgh Healthcare Facility. I forget what it is. So yeah, it's if you go to VA.gov, there is like a route a route like controller kind of already in there, but it's at like a higher level that's not like easy for us to update and stuff like that. But anyways, it's VA.gov itself is a static site served out of an S3 bucket right now today, and most of the pages on there are, but not all of them are. Some of the paths go to legacy applications and stuff like that. So yeah, hopefully that answers that question.
Yeah, I think that covers it. And then Salim, Kelly was asking, this one might be directed more towards you, like what type of cost savings do you get by moving to static sites? Since it sounds like you've done that work for a lot of different clients of yours.
Yeah, it depends on the site. If it's a small site, then the cost savings are, if it's a small low traffic site, then the cost savings aren't that great. But if it's a high traffic site, then the cost savings are just tremendous because you're not actually running any of that, the engine or the technology behind serving out Drupal. So you can serve, millions, billions of pages on static sites for close to whatever the CDN costs are. So yeah, huge cost savings, thousands and thousands of dollars. So, yeah. Okay, so last slide on this on the plan here. For I think you covered most of this, but
I think I covered.
yeah.
I was Drupal response. Yeah, new plan, incremental. We decided against the incremental approach because, well, this is before we saw Quant CDN, which the name sounds funny, but they figured out the whole Drupal integration really nicely, and they even have version control, like a middle layer version control that you can redeploy old versions and stuff like that. And if you're gonna really look at it, I would highly look at that. They have an on-premise version too.
Can you spell that, Elijah? Quant CDN?
Yeah, we have a slide coming up. QUANT space CDN, and I don't have enough context on why it's called the CDN, but like the network part, the N part, but maybe yeah. But anyway, it's like if we were going to go that route, we would actually, I would highly recommend switching to that version of it. And I'm not trying to sell it at all. I've never used it. I saw a demo of it. It looked amazing. Not pitching it though. Just I have no association or affiliation with that. Just
There's a couple of other questions. There's what kind of caching benefits and search benefits on sites? Could you please provide some info, and what kind of selective content refresh frequency is used, and what are best practices?
those 3 questions, right?
I see 2 questions. Caching benefits. Yeah, I guess.
Yeah.
I guess 3 questions. Caching benefits, search benefits.
The caching benefits are really like static is you don't have like a ever cold cache situation. So you don't ever have like a situation where the user is hitting a database back site that doesn't have a cache and has to be dynamically generated. So that it's warm all the time. So your first cold cache hit scenario never happens with users. So it's always a consistent experience. Like you're surfing around the site, and then like fast page. Oh, this one's a cold cache hit, and that one's going to take 5 seconds because it takes a bit to render. And then you get like this weird, I call it like I think a distributed jank. It's like the site's fast except for this thing, and it's like I'd rather have every single page be 3 seconds than 10 pages be under a second and 1 page be 5 seconds. It creates this weird experience. It's like a janky experience. JANK.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, I'm gonna move on to.
I didn't know about the other question. Sorry, but yeah.
I think we'll cover some of it later on the search and so on. So
Okay.
anyway,
We have 5 minutes left, right?
Yeah, so I want to move on to some of the other things. So and we've got a bunch of slides. So for the potential for this is the big potential for static sites is a lot of the Drupal 7 sites that are out there that people do not want to maintain. So look at that. Look at static sites as a good option for that. The missing tool chain for those specific for that tool for that use case is, there's no way to manage those sites and create the static site and still manage those sites in the background. So it would be great if you can build a tool chain like this, where you can create a dev test stage. You can keep dev test stage behind your firewall, and then you're pushing out the static site outside your firewall. Okay. And then that way you can actually, when you're done, you can disable this, you can enable or disable this as needed, and then you can upgrade. Everything's behind your firewall, and then you can upgrade those things as needed. And if there's a 0-day attack, this might buy you some time, because what's exposed outside the firewall um, is your static site. But there is on the government front, there is a 0-day mandate, and that
Zero
requires
trust.
you zero trust mandate, and that requires you to make sure that regardless of where your dynamic site is, so if you've got the dynamic site running, regardless of where it is, inside or outside the firewall, you should keep that updated and patched. So the other option, and you can read through that text yourself. But the other option is that if you've got something running, then convert it into a static site and maybe just destroy it or archive your old site, the dynamic site. So that's one option. So options for creating static sites. There's a bunch of options that we've written here. There's Drupal specific stuff for Druxt, Gatsby, Next.js. Tome is in here. QuantCDN, DevPanel, that's the company it's the tools that we're developing, and we have the whole tool chain that we're doing for Drupal 7. So these things work really well for Drupal 8. For Drupal 7, if you're looking for open source options, the httrack and wget are good options. And then you can either build your own tool chain to do this. You can look at Tome and QuantCDN. You can actually combine Tome and Quant with things like Pantheon uh, or you can combine Tome with Pantheon and Netlify. So if you've already got your sites on Pantheon and you don't want to move them, you can actually combine that with Tome and Netlify. There's a whole article about that, and there's a link for that, so you can read on that. This is one of the tool chains that we developed for one of our clients where they wanted different versions of the static site. So you can create different versions of the static site, and then you can deploy a version. You can go back and look at older versions and then deploy those if you want, mainly to archive older sites for compliance. And in conclusion, it depends on your use case. Are static sites good for you? I mean, you've heard now both sides of the coin, uh, both sides of the equation here. It's not just for Drupal 7 sites. There's also Drupal 8 and Drupal 9 sites that you can use static sites for. The high traffic sites, if you can use them for high traffic sites, then you'll get the most bang for the buck. But they are ideal for brochure sites and simple sites and low traffic sites. Those are the less interactive and less active sites. There are archivable sites. Those are all just a given for static sites. So that's it for us. There is we've put in in the appendix. There's a bunch of links for the search and for form services. Some of these are open source, and you can we put in the GitHub links for this as well. There's Netlify. There's all these other services that are out there that you can look at. And then Algolia and Lunar forms are really Algolia and Lunar search are really good for static sites. But other questions? Let's see.
We have 0 minutes left. We have a static site BOF tomorrow. So
That's
if you
right.
want to hang out and ask more questions and best practices and just pick brains of things, and other people that are versed in static sites will be there too. 9 o'clock Pacific and 12 o'clock Eastern. We got a BOF slot. I think it's BOF number 5 slot.
Fantastic.
Okay. All right.
And,
thank you, everyone.
And where will folks be able to get these slides so that they can see those links?
Yeah, we will make those available, I guess, right after this. So wherever the video is, we'll link the slides to those. So.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks, y'all. This was great. And show up at the BOF tomorrow. Tomorrow, you said?
Yeah.
Okay.
BOF number
Thursday.
5.
So Thursday, yeah, Thursday. It's Thursday.
Yeah, that's tomorrow, right?
Thursday, October 14th, 2021.
All right.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thanks,
All right.
Salim. Thanks, Elijah. We'll talk to y'all soon.
See ya.
Wow.
Bye.